Good morning. We look today at Psalm 77 and Psalm 78, two of them again attributed to Asaph, who was one of the worship leaders in King David's time, or he was one of King David's leaders anyway in so many different ways. And in Psalm 77, it's again a prayer of deliverance from personal trouble. And, the psalmist finds himself feeling lost and alone and wondering, where is God? I cry to God aloud that he may hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. I stretch, my hand is stretched out without wearying. I mean, he prays continually. There's something serious going on that he needs help with. And, there were times in David's reign that the enemies were successful against them, and, David sinned and all of these things. And so Asaph was referring to many of those different times in there. And he says, you keep my eyelids from closing. I'm so troubled I cannot speak. I mean, you keep my eyelids from closing, can't sleep. How many of us have been there? I mean, pretty often it seems like. I mean, your mind is going, and your body is saying, stop, I gotta rest. But your mind is just, you keep my eyelids from closing. And then the remembering comes in. I remember the days of old. I commune with my heart. I meditate. Will the Lord spurn me forever? Will he never hear me? Will he never again be favorable? But, the psalmist knows the history of the Israelites, and he knows, and he talks about that, how, and we're going to see that in Psalm 78 especially, that, God remember, God turns away from Ephraim because Ephraim's band and he chooses Judah, but will the Lord spurn me forever? Has his steadfast love ceased? He says, has his steadfast love, his steadfast means never ending. Has his steadfast, dependable, always there love ceased? What a question. I mean, it made me think of, Tevier. Then the question his wife said, do you love me? And he has to say, do I love her? But has that love ceased? No, it's there. Are his promises at an end? Has God forgotten to be gracious? I mean, think about that. I mean, what a devastating thing it would be if God forgot how to be gracious, if God just disappeared, if God just decided to let the world alone and we, the people of the world, just leave us alone and be done. And he says, has his anger shut up his compassion? Is he so angry with his people for being disobedient? And they were so many times. We all know that. They were worshiping false gods and questioning God and not being happy. And then verse 11 calls to the Lord's mind, the deeds of the Lord. I will remember the wanderings. I will meditate on your work. Your ways are holy. You are the God who works. And then in the story of creation, in verses 16 through 20, he's reminding, when the waters saw you, they were afraid. They trembled. The clouds poured out water. The sun, God is the God of heaven and earth, and he's the master and the creator of all. And so Asaph is remembering those things, reminding God of those things, but also reminding himself that God is in the midst of all things, and it's he's kind of mournful at the end here. Your way was through the sea, your footprints were unseen. You led the people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. You led. I mean, it's, God, why do you seem so gone right now? Why are you not helping us in this time? And you're just going through all of that. And it's, a cry for help and a cry for mercy, a cry for God, again, to remember his people, even though that they are a sinful people, just to remember. Psalm 78 is one of the psalms that was a hymn of praise and worship when they would get together that way for the major festivals. It's a fairly long psalm. It's not the longest psalm by any stretch of the imagination. It's 72 verses, which it seems like a long psalm, and it is. But You know, and again, he's reaching out. Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. Encourage the people to listen to his words about God. I will open my mouth. I will utter dark sayings, things we've heard from old and have known. These are reminders. These are reminders of God's leading the people. You know, we will not hide them from our children. We're going to teach them. And this was God's instructions, you know. Teach your children. Remind them. You know, and that's, you know, the Seder meal, the first Passover. You know, on a yearly basis, get together and remind your people that we were slaves in Egypt and that God did all of these things. And we go through, and later on in this psalm, we kind of hear the plagues reiterated again and talked about as we get into the, you know, to the latter part of the Bible, you know, this anyway, starting like in verse 40 and on there, you know, it's all of those things that way. But verse 5, he established a decree in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, and he commanded the people to teach the children. Verse 9, the Ephraimites, armed with a bow, turned back the day of the battle. They did not keep the Lord's covenant. And so then God chose Judah then to be the people. And this was the division of the northern and southern kingdoms, if you remember, that, you know, that God seemed to be with Judah and not with the rest so much. And that division of the kingdoms, you know, carried on for many generations. You know, they forgot to walk according to his deeds or his laws. They forgot what he had done, the miracles he had shown, you know, and so it's, you know, he's reminding the people of God's favor and of God's leading. In the daytime, he led them with the cloud, at night with the fiery light. So this is the Exodus, you know, it's all of those remembering. And then verse 17, well, you know, verse 16, he made the streams come out of rocks, caused waters to flow like rivers. And 17, yet they sinned still more against him. I mean, even when God was leading the people out of slavery, you know, they didn't trust him. They didn't, you know, and in so many ways I can understand that. You know, they'd been slaves and captive for so many years, and then, you know, everything had been, you know, even though they'd had to work hard for it, they hadn't had to go out and buy their food and do different things. You know, it was such a different life. And all of a sudden they're out in the wilderness, and where are we going to get food? Where are we going? We'd like some meat. We had good meals anyway when we were slaves. They sinned against the Most High God by rebelling in the desert. And you know, so we have that reminder of the wilderness wandering and of those, you know, and it says, they spoke against God, saying, can he spread a table in the wilderness? Even though he struck the rock so that water gushed out and the torrents overflowed, and he gave bread and provided meat for his people. You know, the Lord heard, and it says he was filled with rage. And I can totally understand that. I mean, you know, when we're teaching our children, and we explain to them about something, or maybe not just our children, but even, you know, people we work with, or other, you know, older people as well. You know, we're trying to teach them, and they won't listen. You know, they're going to be bullheaded and do it their own way. And you know, we sometimes get angry at those kinds of things. And so it's, you know, God's anger was there because they didn't trust and they didn't listen. And then when we get down to verse 39, the psalmist says, or 38, I'm going to start there. Yet, being compassionate, forgave their iniquity. He did not destroy them. He restrained his anger, and he remembered that they were flesh. He remembered that they weren't gods. They weren't angels. They were flesh and blood, people of his creation, people that had been led into sin, people that can't help but sinning. I mean, I think it would be so nice to be able to go without sinning, but I know that I sin, and I don't want to. I don't intentionally, but I do, and God knows that, you know, and And, verse 40, how often they rebelled against him and grieved him. They tested God again and again. And we find that. And then we come back into what I talked about earlier with, reiterating the plagues and remembering what God had done, the extreme measures that God took. And, these measures were extreme, especially the 10th plague. There were extreme measures that God took to protect and to set his people free. In verse 55, he drove out nations before them. When God led them finally to the promised land, God was the one that was leading the battle and taking care of the people and providing this land for the people to live. In verse 67 again, he rejected the tent of Joseph. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but he chose the tribe of Judah. Again, because of the sin, because of the rebellion. And then verse 70, he chose his servant David, took him from the sheepfolds to be the shepherd of his people. So, this is God. Think about that. He took David, a shepherd, from the sheepfold to be the shepherd of his people, to lead, to provide, to protect, and to care for. And then verse 72 holds true today. It says, with an upright heart, he tended them and guided them with a skillful hand. May God help our hearts to be upright and continue to lead and guide us every day.